We have finally reached the fourth and final game in the Nicktoons Unite saga, and we're starting off this review with a major shakeup. Blue Tongue Entertainment, who developed the last three games, did not return to develop the fourth entry. They were most likely busy with their new original game, The Blob. So the fourth Nicktoons title would be developed by Incinerator Studios, who had only worked on racing games before this. Now, not that the last three games were masterpieces, but switching developers at the fourth game is a little weird. Speaking of weird, let's talk about that title. SpongeBob SquarePants, featuring Nicktoons Globs of Doom. Now, coming off of the last three games, this may seem a bit strange, unless you lived outside of North America. You see, outside of North America, the series has had the title of SpongeBob and Friends. This seems like a marketing tactic, as SpongeBob does seem like the more marketable character out of the group. It must not have helped enough though, seeing as this is the final game in the series. While there would be more crossover games after this, there weren't any others that connected to this series. Is it because this game was a disaster, or was this a natural place to end the series? Let's find out. We begin the game in Bikini Bottom, where SpongeBob's walk to work is interrupted when the population gets hit with this weird orange goop. Before anything can really develop, Jimmy Neutron shows up and tells SpongeBob and Patrick to come with him. They do, and they end up back on Volcano Island, with Danny and Tax showing up and saying that their worlds are also being invaded by the orange goo. But they're not alone, as villains from their worlds show up saying they need to team up.
All of us are threatened.
Technus. Beautiful, gorgeous.
Traylock.
Langton?
Yes, you know us.
Okay, let's be civil. I invited the evil syndicate here for a reason.
But they're evil.
How could you be so sure the evil syndicate are evil?
I'd say the evil part of the name's a dead giveaway.
All our homes are threatened. The only way to defeat this enemy is to join forces.
Now, they decide to team up and defeat this alien threat together. Before we can get deeper into the game, I want to discuss two things from the opening. First thing being these character models, because these models are horrible. They look almost like action figures brought to life in horrifying detail. Patrick's close-up here especially highlights the awful looking models. They look so bad. Jimmy's eyebrows look like pickles. Danny's eyebrows are just rectangles. In my opinion, the worst looking characters by far are Jimmy, Danny, Traylock, or Traylock, whatever he's called, and Technus. Speaking of those last two characters, here's the second thing I wanted to discuss: the playable roster. So the big gimmick, or attraction of this game, is that you get to play as both the heroes and the villains. The playable heroes include SpongeBob, Jimmy Neutron, Danny Phantom, Tack, and Invader Zim. We'll come back to that later. The playable villains include Plankton, Beautiful Gorgeous, Technus, Traylock, and Dib. This is an extremely odd cast of characters. For one, this is the first game in the series not to feature Timmy Turner. It's strange because Fairly Odd Parents was still in the air when this game came out. The only reason I can possibly see for him not being here is because apparently there are some issues when it comes to the TV show rights, with Nickelodeon supposedly only owning the rights in North America. Again, take this with a grain of salt. No one has ever confirmed the reason why he isn't here, but Timmy isn't the biggest problem with the cast. To me, almost none of the villains make sense for this game. Plankton is the only one that makes sense, because everyone knows him. But Beautiful Gorgeous, Technus, and Traylock are some borderline deep cuts. Then, there's the Invader Zim characters. Now, while I love their inclusion in the game, I don't really understand the switch up here. For some reason, Zim is on the hero's side, while Dib teams up with the villains. It's a pretty strange decision, which this game is seemingly full of. Now, fun fact, we're almost 700 words into this video, and I haven't even mentioned the gameplay yet. So let's change that. Now unfortunately, I don't have too much to say about the gameplay. It plays a lot like Battle for Volcano Island. Linear levels with some basic platforming and basic combat thrown throughout. One of the few changes from Volcano Island is in the ranged attack. All it does in this game is allow you to put the enemy in a state where you can kill them instantly. All of the characters have their own variations of the ranged attack, but the results are the same. The only other thing I can think of that's new are the team-up attacks. Each level, as far as I can remember, has a unique pair of 2 characters for each level, and each pair has their own unique team-up attacks. The results are about the same as the normal ranged attack, except now, a group of enemies can be insta-killed after the attack. But that's literally it as far as new gameplay additions go for the game. Yep, we're already done with new things added to the gameplay. Literally, the only interesting part left to talk about in the game are the boss fights. Oh, my mistake. I said the interesting part, when I should have said the boring part, because these boss fights aren't that good. Bubble Bass is the first boss fight, and you throw Krabby Patties into his mouth to beat him. No joke, I think I beat this guy in less than 5 minutes. Then, there's Gurr, who you just need to cross his lawn of doom, then wait for an opening to hit him. Ghost Dog is slightly more interesting, requiring you to activate the lasers in the room and have him run into them. It's more creative than just hitting him, but it's also not that fun. Then there's the girl-eating plant in Retroville. It's very similar to Gurr, in that you have to get past the opening section and then find an opening to hit it. Then, there's Globulus Maximus, who you fight in space with a giant robot. You just need to destroy the shields defending him, and then go in for the kill. Repeat until he's defeated. But that's actually not the final boss. The final boss is the robot you piloted in that last fight. You play as Globulus Maximus in this fight, and unfortunately, this might be the second easiest fight in the game, only beaten by Bubble Bass from the beginning of the game. Now, if I had to pick one boss from the game that's my favorite, it'd actually be this fight. The reason I like this one the most is because this one actually has an alternate ending if you lose the fight. I discovered this after looking up some stuff about the game on YouTube, simply because this fight is so easy that I never lost to it and got to see the alternate ending. But even with that cool feature, the ending still isn't that great. All it shows is the villains trapping Globulus and thinking of some ways to use his powers for evil purposes. But again, the fight is so easy you'll likely never see it unless you intentionally lose. So that's it for the gameplay. I'll discuss my actual thoughts about it later on, but for now, I want to discuss environments. You actually get to visit the homes of every character. I know Toybots did technically have Bikini Bottom, Amity Park, and Fairy World levels, but those felt unrecognizable from their TV shows. But here, levels actually look like they're from the shows. So getting to explore these places really adds some fun to the game. The scale of the levels feel huge. You see a lot of iconic parts of SpongeBob's world here. Scaling the buildings in Amity Park adds a lot to that place. But most importantly, Jimmy finally gets representation by having levels take place in Retroville. It only took 4 games, but it's here now, which is nice. Believe it or not, the worlds/levels are actually one of, if not my favorite parts of the game. Each world feels fully realized here, especially Zim and Danny's worlds, since they never got a console game where you can explore their respective homes. So the game feels special for that reason. But that's about the only thing that makes the game feel truly special. A lot of the other aspects hold it back from anything being worth going back to. One of those aspects being the story, which we should really get back to. I'm gonna be honest, writing this part of the script has been kind of hard. Mostly because this story is nothing really special. Throughout the game, you begin collecting pieces of Magoo technology in order to power a robot for the final boss. While this is happening, SpongeBob begins to absorb some of the goo throughout the story. This allows the villain of the game, Globulus Maximus, to begin communicating through SpongeBob. The only thing that really comes from this is that Globulus decides he wants to take on the form of SpongeBob. After that, our group go to fight Globulus, and upon defeating him, the villains decide to betray us. Because of course they do. Globulus then reveals he's a space booger, and... I'm sorry, what?
I was created along with the beginning of the universe.
You mean during the Big Bang?
No, during the big sneeze.
You mean you're not evil then? You're a giant booger?
I'll come back to this later. Then Globulus transforms into a giant SpongeBob, beats the bad guys, and then drops the heroes back off at Volcano Island. Once he leaves, we get this truly wonderful ending.
Goodbye.
If he was born a giant booger, that means something with a nose that big created him. And think how big you'd have to be to have that big a nose!
Old Hermit Crab, we couldn't have done it without you. We owe you a big
Hey, you think this is just like when time began? You know, like the beginning? Early on?
No, Patrick! Feels more like the end.
This is how the series ends. 4 games in, and it ends like this. Now look, this story isn't terrible. There are some parts I like. In particular, I find that the interactions between characters is better here than in Toybots.
Don't be so one-eyed about it. The Magu enhancement means that you've got something you always wanted.
But this isn't the Krabby Patty secret recipe!
No, size!
Yes! Now I can crush my enemies and take over the world! Hey, what gives?
My juju powers are telling me something.
That you're not wearing a shirt?
That thing in the dog's mouth is the missing piece we need. Come on!
There is no way I'm wiping off the drool. What? You live here? That beats living in a bucket.
Come on, we gotta find your Bulba.
Jib who what?
My mentor. He may know where the piece is hidden.
May the juju be with you.
Granted, it still isn't on the same level as the first game. Ultimately though, the interactions aren't enough to save the story and the game itself. In fact, if you asked me to describe the game in one word, it'd be boring. The gameplay is just a repeat of Volcano Island, while the story itself is really just uninteresting. Honestly, it's the strange stuff that interests me. Like, why is half the roster from shows that were cancelled? Who thought these character models would appeal to anyone? Lastly, who thought that fighting a space booger was a good idea? Actually, let me talk about this for a second. The first game featured a team of the greatest villains for you to fight. The second featured a new threat that threatened every single character's world. Game 3 had you stopping a villain from Game 1 from winning an award, I guess? Honestly, I didn't care for that much. But that game, and especially the games beforehand, had a much better setup and payoff than fighting a space booger. Maybe I'm making a bigger deal of this than anyone else would. These games are made for 6 to 8 year olds. And I'm 25. But these games were the first to essentially introduce the idea of crossovers to me. When I was younger, these were like the coolest things ever to me. So now looking at these games as an adult, and realizing that this is how it ended, with a game that on a good day, is only a 6 out of 10, is rather disappointing to me. So ultimately, Nicktoons Globs of Doom is a disappointing end to this series of games. In fact, this was the last game to feature Nickelodeon characters crossing over with one another in a story mode until 2023, with the release of Nickelodeon All-Star Brawl 2. It is such an occasion to me that I've decided to end this marathon by taking a look at the story mode of this game to end the series. Now let me put some disclaimers up first. 1. I'm not reviewing the game as a whole. I'm specifically looking at the story mode only. 2. I didn't play through the whole story. I only played around an hour of it, just to get an idea of what it was like. 3. Nick All-Star Brawl 2 is a platform fighter, like Super Smash Bros. Meaning, your primary goal is to get your opponent's percentage high enough to where they can essentially be knocked off the stage. I explain this for 2 reasons. 1, so you can understand the basics of the actual gameplay. And 2, because I am awful at these games. So when you see the footage in the background, you'll notice that I'm not very good. With that out of the way, let's actually look at the story. The premise is great. It sees Vlad from Danny Phantom trying to conquer all of the worlds. So Clockwork, also from Danny Phantom, saves SpongeBob, who begins a journey to defeat Vlad. You go through stage to stage and do a variety of things. You can have a one-on-one fight, go through an obstacle course, or fight a group of enemies. Occasionally, you get to stop and get upgrades from different characters. Eventually, you end a section by fighting a boss battle, and these are actually quite fun. But I've neglected to mention one of the most important aspects of the story mode. It's a roguelike, which can be somewhat difficult to explain, so let me try my best to explain it real quick. In a roguelike, you start out at a hub world. In the hub world, you meet characters and buy permanent upgrades. When you're ready, you begin a level and start what is called a run. In the run, you play the game as normal, but any upgrades you find along the way aren't permanent upgrades like in the hub. The reason I bring this up is because if you lose or die during your run, you lose any upgrades you picked up during the run. Also, upon losing, you're sent back to the hub world and have to restart the area you were in from the beginning. The setup I just explained is almost the exact setup for the story mode here in this game. But it's because of that setup that I honestly found myself lukewarm on the whole story mode here. I'm just not that big a fan of roguelikes, which is ultimately what brings the story down for me. That, and the fact that I'm not the biggest fan of the platform fighter genre. However, it's still a fun game to play, and I just enjoy the fact that we have a new game where Nickelodeon characters can cross over with a story to go with it. So thankfully, this marathon doesn't end on a whimper with Globs of Doom. Now normally, at the end of a series, I'd rank all the games in the series, but for this one, I'm not going to do that, because ultimately, I really enjoyed only one game in the series, Volcano Island. It's the one I'd go back to again out of the whole series. It's unfortunate, because as a kid, I loved these games, even if I couldn't beat them. But as an adult, this is just how I feel. With that, we have finally reviewed all of the games in the Nicktoons Unite series, and it only took almost 2 years!